You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network.
Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on.
Happy Monday. This is Mondays at the Overhead Wire, sponsored by our super generous Patreon supporters. I'm Jeff Wood, your host, and joined by Han Solo. That's right, our favorite Wookiee's right-hand man is here to keep us hydrated. So we've got a lot of stuff to talk about, including what we've got coming up on the podcast. I know that we mentioned last time that we were going to talk about gas taxes, but I'm going to wait until that comes around again. I know I've said that a couple times, but it's kind of funny how it dropped off the news cycle, even though prices are still high. I think people are still talking about it in person, but maybe not in the news for some reason. Maybe it just didn't pique people's interest as all these other things are going on, like Twitter being purchased and whatever else. So craziness out there. But in terms of the podcast, tomorrow I'm going to talk with Alex Gouldworth and Alex Murphy about transport insecurity. I'm looking forward to that. And Thursday I'll be chatting with Tom Wright from the Regional Plan Association in New York. That's going to be a fun conversation as well. We've also set up a few other episodes, including one on meg regions, and I have some in the hopper as well that I'll start scheduling soon. But this week on the Talking Headways podcast, we've got Travis Norvell talking about how he's been thinking about church parking lots and walking out and about in his community. And that's a fun discussion, so I'm looking forward to sharing that with folks on Thursday. And hopefully folks get to check it out. We also had last week's episode, which I thought was really, really good. If you didn't listen to it, we talked about lighting for transportation planners. Really interesting discussion on a topic I really wasn't that knowledgeable about before, but I'm glad we got to talk about it. And it was Frank Markowitz and Lenny Schwendiger as well to come on the show and talk about that stuff. So really cool conversation. Hopefully folks get to check that out if they get a chance. And also, because we cover all these books, as I mentioned last time and the time before that, we partnered with bookshop.org, which is an organization that we keep telling people to go to, but now we're an affiliate. So this means that if you buy a book through the Overhead Wire shop on Bookshop, a small amount of that purchase goes to us. Now, we love when you order from your local bookstores, but if you want to support the authors we have on and keep us interviewing them, that would be awesome. You can do so through our Bookshop shop. And all the books we've ever discussed on the show with the authors are now in the shop, bookshop.org/shop/The Overhead Wire, bookshop.org/shop/The Overhead Wire if you want to get some books. I'm also thinking about doing like a rebate program. So when folks order books, I can send you back like a rebate. So if you order a bunch of them, we can actually give you some percentages off. Bookshop actually doesn't do that, but they give us a cut, and so maybe that I can give folks a cut back as well if they order through us. So that would be really kind of something I've been thinking about. So we're going to share that here. And this is episode 109. We're in session, and I'm just talking to myself. But I'm talking to you all as well, so I appreciate you listening. Before we get to the show, I want to let folks know that you can get this podcast wherever you find your podcasts, including iHeartRadio, Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, and of course, Apple Podcasts. If it's working, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and subscribing means you get both Mondays at the Overhead Wire, Talking Headways on the same feed, 2 fun podcasts, 1 great channel. So thanks to the folks that subscribe through podcatchers. I imagine that's a lot of you all because I don't really post this podcast many places. The other Talking Headways podcast gets posted on Streets Blog and some other places, including some of the Friday stuff we do for Greater Washington, or Streets.mn, and as well as Urban Milwaukee, which go check out those places as well on Fridays and Sundays, and you'll find some of the work that we've been doing, kind of putting together news and articles and stuff. But yeah, we really appreciate it when you subscribe to the podcatcher. It keeps you coming back and keeps you downloading and keeps the numbers up. So we appreciate it, all the listeners that come through that way. Okay, so I don't really have much else to say before we get to the news. If anybody has some comments or questions, as always, you can send us notes at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. And as you can hear my chair squeaking around, I'm trying to readjust, but I'll just get to the point. Well, this is the news. Here are a few stories that piqued our interest from the newsletter over the last few weeks. And as I've said before, the newsletter, we put that out every day, weekday, I should say, and we've been doing it since about 2006. So feel free to sign up if you haven't already. I know that some people are leaving Twitter because they feel like the apocalypse is coming. But if you want to still get our musings as well as articles, up to 30, 40 a day, covering cities and transportation, urban planning, all those things, then you can go to theoverheadwire.com and check it out and get it in your inbox. It'll keep you information. I know that lots of people subscribe so they can get, fodder to share on their social media networks, and kind of learn about what's going on during the week, during the day. And that's where we get the news, the most popular news to share here on Monday's show. So if you want to get stuff early, feel free to sign up for the newsletter 2-week trial for free when you get a chance. All right. Here's some items over the last 2-3 weeks since the last episode that were popular. A smart home company disappears completely. A smart home company with the Internet of Things devices like light bulbs and switches controlled through apps shut down abruptly, leaving its users in a lurch. The company's servers were shut down, and anyone who now would do a factory reset on the system will now brick any smart feature in their home. The company's executives even scrubbed their LinkedIn pages, likely fearing a massive backlash. The move opens up a conversation about the sustainability long-term of connected devices. So this was by Ram Amadeo of Ars Technica. So this is kind of crazy, right? A smart home company completely shuts down. Its CEOs delete any mention of the company on LinkedIn, and people who bought into these systems are left with hardware that could stop working if they accidentally reset them. And I know, companies go out of business all the time, but they could have at least given people a warning or some tools to deal with the coming problem that they might have had. That seems a little bit short-sighted to me, or at least like some sort of a manual or maybe a PDF somewhere online that people could download to maybe not have everything get bricked if you reset. Their servers are shut down and everything. It's crazy. I know for me, we've got 2 smart light bulbs which we've had mixed results with in terms of getting them to work on a daily basis with our phones. And that experience alone actually makes me think that I'll never get any smart home appliances or features or anything. I don't need a smart refrigerator. I don't need a Nest or anything like that. I can switch on the heater with my fingers, and I understand the use cases and stuff if you're out of the house, those types of things. But it's just not worth it if companies eventually disappear. It seems to me that it's a little bit silly. Obviously, the power goes out. You can't use any electricity, but it just seems silly if this is all just kind of going to disappear. But also, if it just doesn't work because the connectivity problems. That's the thing that we had the problem with the light bulbs is sometimes they want to turn off, sometimes they don't. And so you'll have to manually do it if it doesn't quite work. When it works really well, it works great. But otherwise, it's kind of a funky thing. It also makes me kind of think of the Internet of Things writ large and how we have all these connected devices. And sure, they may bring a little bit of convenience, but is it enough to deal with the trade-offs that we're dealing with, whether that's privacy, whether that's being able to get hacked and turn them all against us, whether the robot apocalypse is coming? I don't know, but I'm wondering if anybody has had any of these experiences before with smart home devices or smart infrastructure that way. All these stories about it just make me really feel like a little bit, I want to be analog instead of digital on a lot of these things, which kind of leads into our next story, actually. How governments can use the metaverse. A new report from the National League of Cities, NLC, discusses why governments should think harder about how they can interact with the metaverse. The metaverse, a network of online three-dimensional worlds, has been gathering more attention as Facebook renamed its parent company to Meta, and virtual reality headsets have become commonplace. The report discusses opportunities for government such as virtual in-person consultation and shaping the narrative of what it can be used for going forward. This is by Andy Castillo at American City and County, talking about the National League of Cities report. Going back to that previous article, I feel like a little bit of an out-of-touch Luddite today. NLC released this report on how city governments need to get ahead of the metaverse. And I've personally never used virtual reality goggles, and I'm not sure I really will ever have the time. They're kind of expensive. It's kind of something that you have to get in. You have to have a space in your apartment to do it. I haven't even played video games in forever, even though I loved, Xbox and all that stuff when I was younger. I just don't really have time for it. I'm making podcasts and putting together newsletters and doing other things, watching some TV or something on a Friday night, maybe some moon nights or something. But, it's something that I feel like if you have the time and the space to learn those things, I think you're more likely to gravitate towards them. But I have a feeling that you'll, some of the web maybe migrates this way, and it might not be as much of a niche for folks that are younger and want to, kind of interact in the world this way, and that's fine. But I have a feeling you'll still be able to do the things in the real world online that you won't need a virtual place for. I don't really see a virtual reality replacing a phone call or a visit to a website of a bank, for example. But heck, what do I know? I'm just just an old man Luddite these days, I guess. But I do think it's important to get ahead of some of these things. I mean, you think about how far and how fast technology moves. If cities can kind of get out ahead of some of these things, they might actually be beneficial. I don't necessarily share that same enthusiasm for things like Bitcoin or really risky bets, but in terms of things that might aid servicing the public better, that's probably a way to go, especially when it comes to whether it's in-person meetings or consultations or things like that. Maybe it's going to the building department and you can have actually maybe they'll have some like 3D rendering of the building that you're trying to get up to code or whatever it is. But there might be some things that happen. But definitely check this out if you get a chance, and if you're interested in this specific topic. There's been a lot on the metaverse lately, and especially through the architecture world. I know that some of the posts that we've had on the articles list have been from the architecture world and them thinking about how to design a metaverse for people and whether it's actually, a more valuable space for them to do, try wild things that can't be tried in public because of all the NIMBYism, et cetera. So interesting thing to think about. Maybe I'll get a little bit more, wise about it going forward, but it's not something that I'm thinking about at the moment, even though it's out there. And it's probably something I'll miss the boat on, but maybe I'll catch up later. Who knows? All right. More thinking about indoor air quality. During the pandemic, more and more people started to pay attention to indoor air quality as it became known that the virus was spread through the air and people spent more time at home. And after wildfire season becoming more and more impactful and a pandemic, more and more people are thinking about the air we breathe indoors and how it impacts our health. This was by Andrew Zaleski in GQ magazine. This is something that people are thinking about more and more, especially as the discussion of indoor air quality related to like gas ranges increases. Here in the West, we've been paying attention for a few years now because of all the fires that happened in the summertime. And luckily for me, personally, I had an air purifier and for some other medical stuff that I thought I needed it for in the past, which I really didn't need it for, but I ended up with an air purifier, and it works really well in fire season. And it's actually something that we talked about a lot in when I was at UT and Tracy was teaching the class on built environment and public health. That was when I first learned about the indoor air quality issue back there, and probably about 2004 or 2005. So it's been a discussion topic for quite a while, but at the same time, I think more and more people are really paying attention because of the amount of time that they had to spend indoors at their own house, not just at the office. And I think they have all of these other issues like sick building syndrome and those types of things that people have been focused on, but they haven't really done much because at the end of the day, you go away from the office or you change jobs and you don't worry about it as much. You're not stuck in the same place for so long. But there is something to be said for cleaning out the air. And I think it's going to be a bigger topic, especially as we try to figure out the best way to fix buildings in order to deal with the virus, future viruses, and other climate change stuff that's happening. Our buildings are going to have to become cleaner. And hopefully, just like sanitation was a big changing point after the plague and other, Jon Snow's, pump that's focused on cholera, air quality in buildings is kind of the next frontier of that safety issue, life systems issue in buildings. And it's something that we'll need to focus on if we're going to kind of continue to keep ourselves safer and safer. Now, there might be an issue with becoming too sterile, but I don't think that we're going to have a problem with that anytime soon. Okay, next up. Americans believe suburbs are greener than cities. After a tweet that basically claimed rural areas were more environmentally friendly places to live than cities because they have more trees and open space, YouGov decided to survey Americans about their beliefs on density and environmental friendliness. An online survey of 1,000 people by YouGov found that 75% of respondents believe that living in a suburban area is more environmentally friendly than an urban one, even though experts know that cities are more efficient in energy and water. This was by Taylor Orth at YouGov. Now, this was a bit bonkers to me. I guess I understand why people would think this way because they see more green in the suburbs from the lawns and the trees. But really, as we've probably talked about this a million times, but on a per capita basis, cities are much more environmentally friendly. You drive less, you use less water, you use less energy overall. It's been proven many times over that, on a per person basis, cities overall are probably huge generators of greenhouse gas emissions and emissions more generally and are more environmentally friendly. But, it's something that per capita, per person, it's a lower amount. So if you're going to take yourself and you're going to go and live in the suburbs, you're likely to have a higher emissions level than if you are going to live in a city. It's just kind of a basic thing that we've known for a number of years. But there was this discussion on Twitter about income levels being a bigger determinant than density. But I think that argument will kind of fade away as more and more electrification happens in cities and in buildings. And, the wealthy will always be resource hogs, and we can always try to, make it so that we're trying to figure out how to reduce emissions. And I think the biggest place for the most wealthy is going to be, air travel. That's just a really heavily resource intensive, propulsion. People who live in the suburbs are going to use, they're going to be able to drive more. And so that increases emissions. They're going to have lawns that they need to water. They have other, things to tend to. The houses, are individual and they're not next to each other. And so there's a little bit more heating and cooling that goes on. But, as more solar panels and those types of things changes that calculus, it's going to change over time, I have a feeling. But I think that the cities will change at a much faster clip in a per capita way. So I felt like that was just a weird finding. I mean, it's amazing that 75% of people believe that suburban areas are more environmentally friendly, even though we know from the science and looking at it over many years that that's not the case. So interesting findings, something that we need to work on for sure. Okay, got a couple left here. The science of reckless driving. Research has found that low cortisol levels, which indicate a lower stress level, are a risk factor related to reckless driving. This low cortisol stress response, CSR, showed up in multiple studies of risky driving, and the findings hopefully can be used to create intervention programs to reduce dangerous choices. And this was by Emily Lebeau-Lucchese at Discover magazine. So this was interesting to me for one reason specifically, is that a number of years ago, I read a piece in National Geographic, which I want to do. I love my National Geographic. And it was actually the October 2011 edition. And there was the cover story was about teenage brains. And it still sticks with me today because it was just a fascinating article that said that teenagers are designed to leave the nest before 25. And so they that's why so many kind of bad decisions are made, like speeding, jumping off of roofs into pools, other types of crazy things that you were like, oh man, these kids, skateboarding, all these things that kids do to kind of test their limits. And one of those things is kind of leaving the nest. And I am sure that cortisol levels are tied to that. And as you get older, you kind of chill out because you learn more about the world, you get less stressed, but also it's something that your brain changes over time too. But some people may never change. And so that's where the stress response is tied to reckless drivings and all kinds of other things, especially driving. But it's super interesting to think about how these kind of parts of your makeup, your physical makeup, whether that's your stress response, whether that's how your brain deals with things from a teenager on to older age. This article, I can't, the Discover magazine article is interesting, of course, but that December 2011 article in National Geographic, actually I should say October 2011, sorry, was really interesting. And the reason why I know what date it is actually, I actually stack up my National Geographics and use them as a base for my monitor for my desktop computer. There's a couple of ones that I had duplicates of, and that's one of the ones that I have. And the title of the on the side says Teen Brains, and some of the other articles in that edition are slot canyons and whale sharks. Interesting stuff, but it's fun to think back on stuff you read and how it impacted what you read now. And I see this article about the science of reckless driving. I'm like, oh, that reminds me of that piece in National Geographic I read almost 11 years ago. It's crazy. I also want to note what this Discovery article means specifically is that if you don't have the hormone which causes stress, you're more likely to drive recklessly. It actually points to one of the discussions we have often on street design, which is that we need to design roads that push people to go slower. Doing this means creating more quote-unquote stress in the environment. If you're worried that you're going to go hit a car parked or a tree at going 30 miles an hour, you're more likely to end up going 25 because of the stress that the 30 miles an hour causes you. So it's interesting that this specific physical response they found was tied to more reckless driving. You could say the same thing for, highway design as well. A lot of times the safety folks that are designing highways will make these really wide roads wide lanes and say, oh, this is safer, that allows people to, travel at higher speeds, which is true, but it also means that people can drive at even faster speeds than actually what the highway is quote unquote designed for. So that's another thing that is tied to this as well. So the science and connection of this is really interesting if we think about it from that perspective. Urban design for toddlers. A long-running Japanese television show called Old Enough shows children as young as just under 3 years old running their first errand alone for their parents, albeit in a pretty controlled environment filled with camera operators. But the show exposes Japanese urbanism as a supportive environment that is safe enough for pedestrians of all ages. And this was by Henry Gabar at Slate. Henry always has the good articles. I love this show. Go check it out if you haven't already. There's one episode where a kid drops the fish his dad caught, and it's hilarious. It's like, no, don't do that. And there's another one where the apples are falling down the hill, and just hilarity ensues when these kids go out on their own for the first time. But on a more personal note, I remember walking to school in like third grade in Bakersfield, California. And I remember roaming a lot when I was a kid in the suburbs of Houston as well. And I know my neighborhood specifically, Kingwood, was designed for it. But we really have designed our cities and neighborhoods in a way that I think a lot of places this can't really happen anymore. There's also nowhere to run an errand if the store isn't really close by. And there's, if there's a need for kids to cross massive streets. That's one thing about the neighborhood I grew up in Houston was all of the major streets actually had underpasses for the trail system that was in Kingwood. It was really amazing. You could go, probably about 70 miles or so on the trails and not cross a major street. You went under them on your bike, and it was pretty impressive, the kind of the design of the whole system and how it connected all the houses and all the commerce together without allowing somebody to cross a major road. So really, really well designed. And unfortunately, we don't have more places like that. I feel like we would be more along the lines of the Netherlands if we ended up doing that, but we didn't. But check out Kingwood if you ever get a chance. It's really fascinating to kind of see how that all came together. I tried to do an episode on that at one point, but I think the person who had designed the system had just recently passed away. So it was kind of unfortunate I missed them. I was a little bit late to talk about it. Maybe somebody else would have the knowledge, but it's something I still think I should do, but I just haven't. The thought just came to me again, so I'll try to get on that. But interesting stuff nonetheless. And of course, the Japanese show is a bit exaggerated as there are production and camera people everywhere keeping the kids safe. And the littlest ones, the ones that are under 3 years old, 2 years, 8 months, I should say, those kids, they typically just go like across the street or down the alleyway to like the back house or something like that. So it's like not really they're going that far. But the 4-year-olds, the 5-year-olds, they go a little bit further and get a little bit more. And it's funny when the camera people are not normal people in the world, but they just think they're there randomly, and they don't quite understand that they're being filmed, which is kind of weird to me. But then they're just kids and they have no idea, and they sometimes they wonder, but for the most part they kind of ignore it, and it's kind of funny. But I think that the show is wonderful, and if you haven't canceled your Netflix account like 2 million or so other people that have recently, go check the show out. It's really interesting and fun, and there's something to be said about this urban design that and some of the traffic safety stuff that Japan has come up with. It's really interesting. Check it out if you get a chance. That might be my Puppies and Butterflies later as a part of it. So listen along, and hopefully we'll get some folks on soon to talk about some of this stuff, because I feel like there's others that are watching the show and enjoying it as well. Okay, well. This week and every week, I want to thank our generous Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome and keep the show going by listening and supporting each month. This show and Talking Headways really wouldn't be here without you, so thank you so much. And you can support the show by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. We've had people sign up each month during the pandemic, so we're super appreciative of that. $2 a month will get you some stickers and a handwritten note. $10 a month will get you our bus-only scarf. And, by the way, our bus-only scarf is officially sold out from the store. Though there still are some scarves that I have for Patreon rewards, so I kept a few for that. So if you want one of our bus-only scarves, you can do so by becoming a $10 a month Patreon supporter. Also, I have started designs. I know I've said this a number of times, but I actually have started designs on a new scarf, bike-only scarf. So if you want to check it out, send me an email, theoverheadwire@gmail.com, if you're thinking that this might be the scarf for you, because you weren't sure about the bus-only, but you might want a bike-only. Definitely send me an email, theoverheadwire@gmail.com, and I'll send you kind of an image of the design that I'm thinking of. I think it's kind of cool. It's all green. like a bike lane. It's got fresh Kermit, and I've put a checkerboard at the bottom with a bike lane and a bike only sign. So it's not just a Sharrow, and there is no Sharrow. I thought about putting a Sharrow on there. I was like, no, people don't want Sharrows on their bike scarves. So if you want to take a look at what we got coming up, send me a note, theoverheadwire@gmail.com, and I'll send you a PDF of one side of the scarf. And so you can check it out if you might be interested. We might start some pre-ordering soon or something. So I'm working on it. But so yeah, I'm super excited about that. You can tell. I've been designing it. I got a copy of Illustrator just to focus on that because I got a new computer and my Illustrator disappeared, so I hadn't been able to design a new thing. But we're here. We're doing it. We're getting there. I also have some T-shirts that I have some ideas about too that'll hopefully come out soon. We're working on those as well. So working on a bunch of things. Hopefully they come out and we can get some folks on Patreon, but also if you want to order the scarves and the shirts online, you'll be able to do so at some point in the future. Okay. All right. Also, don't forget to go to RaymondUnwin.com. We did Raymond Unwin's 1909 Classic Town Planning and Practice in audiobook format. And if you want to get a copy, go to RaymondUnwin.com. It's super cheap. I think it's like $5 or something like that. I think I marked it down to definitely. And if it's not $5, message me and I'll set it up for you to get it for $5 because it's a really good book. It's hopefully worth it for folks who want to read kind of about that early urbanist movement. And as I said, if you have any comments or questions, feel free to tweet at us or comment on any of the social sites where the podcast appears. Feel free to email us at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. Puppies and Butterflies, this is part of the show where we talk about something fun, interesting, or maybe it just didn't fit in the other sections. So I think my Puppies and Butterflies goes back to the show Old Enough, which I talked about earlier. It's just fun and a joy to watch. I found that throughout the pandemic, funny and good usually gets me happy. Which is something that we all, I hope we all strive for is getting some happy moments in there. Obviously we need to be balanced, but happy is good. And I think we need to make more fun shows like this or find, shows that other countries have made that are fun. There is probably so much out there that we love, but we don't know it yet. And things like Taskmaster on on Channel 4 in England, are things that I love that I found out later on after they'd started many, many times over and waited until we could watch, binge watch stuff. So I think that's one of the things that we did the most during the pandemic was just binge watch stuff. We did Brooklyn Nine-Nine, we did the Goldbergs, we did a whole bunch of things where we could just watch the whole thing, even though the season started, 10 years ago or something like that. So it's been good to go, did Parks and Rec too. I had never watched it and I was like, oh, okay, let's try this out. And then I put it off for a long time because I was like, I don't know, it might be too close to home. But then with all this extra time that we had to kind of watch some shows and stuff, it finally did it. And it's so great. Where can folks find me online? You can find me on Twitter at The Overhead Wire, at theoverheadwire.com. Thanks for joining us at Mondays at The Overhead Wire. Thanks to our generous patrons for sponsoring this week's podcast and every podcast. We've had a couple of people sign up this month, and I really appreciate that. I'll send out your stickers and your scarves soon. So if folks want to check it out, patreon.com/The Overhead Wire. And I thank you all for listening so much. It really means a lot. I see the numbers, and so I appreciate it. And if you want to write me a note, feel free to do so. Like I said, at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. And we'll see you hopefully soon, hopefully next time.
Talking Monday.